Jack Turner wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. With broad shoulders and a posture slightly hunched from years of labor, he moved through the world quietly, almost blending into the scenery. His brown eyes, steady and reserved, carried the weight of lessons learned the hard way. That life owed you nothing, and expecting otherwise was a fool's game. At 42 years old, Jack had become almost an extension of the luxury condo complex he cared for in Miami. A silent presence, constant, dependable, like the sound of rain tapping gently against a rooftop. Every morning before the sun dared peek over the horizon, Jack was already there. Wearing his faded gray uniform, worn-out boots, a toolbox in one hand, and a black coffee in a paper cup, always from the same small cafe on the corner. The condo was a world apart, towers of shimmering glass, perfectly manicured gardens, infinity pools that spilled into the sky. Luxury vehicles slid through the underground parking like sleek, silent predators. Men in sharp suits, women in designer dresses, young people laughing into their phones, all passing Jack without so much as a glance. But Jack didn't mind. No, there was a quiet pride in the work he did, in making sure every hallway light was working, every elevator ran smoothly, every unseen detail was just right for people who would never know his name. It was his job. It was his responsibility. It was, truthfully, all he had. His home was 40 minutes away, tucked into a worn-down neighborhood where rust was more common than Polish, and kids played in the streets because real parks were a luxury they couldn't afford. His wife, Laura, taught at a public school. His two children, Ethan and Rosie, were the brightest parts of his life, even if Jack hardly saw them during the week. The pay wasn't generous, but it kept the lights on, kept food on the table, and, every once in a while, allowed for small luxuries like Friday night pizza or a matinee at the movies. It wasn't an easy life, but it was an honest one. And for Jack Turner, that had always been enough. Few people really knew Jack. Some of the younger staff thought he was old-fashioned, a man with no ambition, no dreams, just coasting through life with calloused hands and a tired smile. But what they didn't know was that Jack had once dreamed. Oh, yes. Years ago, in another lifetime, Jack had dreamt of being an architect. He had spent long nights sketching buildings on scrap paper, imagining structures that would touch the sky. But life had other plans. A mother's illness, a father's death, bills stacking higher and higher. Dreams, Jack learned, were a luxury some people couldn't afford. So he packed away his drawings in a cardboard box, took the first job he could find, and tried not to look back. Tried. It was an ordinary morning when things began to change. The rumors spread quickly through the halls. Mr. Wallace, the elusive owner of the building, had returned. Few had seen Mr. Wallace in person. A real estate tycoon, owner of dozens of luxury properties across Florida. He was more myth than man. Spoken about only in contracts, whispered about in staff meetings. But now, he was here, walking the halls, watching. Jack first encountered him while fixing a jammed door near the main entrance. He felt the presence first, a heavy, unblinking gaze, and turned to find an older man in a dark suit, silver hair neatly combed, hands clasped behind his back. Mr. Wallace didn't say a word. He simply watched, his eyes sharp, unreadable. Then, without a nod, without a word, he turned and disappeared down the hallway. Jack shrugged it off and went back to work. That was how he dealt with the world, head down, hands steady, heart quiet. But without knowing it, at that very moment, Jack Turner's life had started to change. Over the days that followed, subtle shifts began to happen. Tasks were reassigned. Suddenly, Jack was called for the worst jobs, the messiest, the hardest, the ones no one wanted. Leaks in penthouse bathrooms, backed up sewage lines in luxury suites, emergency repairs in the dead of night. Some of the younger workers grumbled, others flat out refused. Jack went, without complaint, without hesitation, without expecting a single thank you. It was just the work. And to Jack, work was sacred. You did it well, even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching. One afternoon, while Jack was replacing a chandelier in the lobby, he overheard two younger workers gossiping by the front desk. "Word is, Wallace is looking for someone to run the place," one said, chewing gum lazily. "Yeah, but it's not gonna be one of us," the other snickered. "They want someone they can trust, whatever that means." Jack didn't pay them much attention. Management? That wasn't for him. His place was with his toolbox, his hands, his quiet pride. He didn't know. He couldn't have known that from that moment on, someone was already watching him very, very closely. The days turned into weeks. Jack's routine, once predictable and steady, began to shift in small but undeniable ways. Calls came at odd hours. Requests grew heavier, more urgent, more demanding. Yet Jack responded to each one the same way he always had, without question, without complaint, without expectation. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He wasn't chasing a title. He was simply doing what he believed was right. Still, something was changing. The staff noticed first the subtle way the managers watched Jack a little longer in meetings. The way Mr. Wallace's black car would sometimes be seen parked quietly outside the maintenance wing. Jack noticed it too, though he said nothing. He wasn't a man to assume. He wasn't a man to hope for things that were not promised. Hope, he had learned, was dangerous. One evening, Jack found himself fixing a broken pipe in the executive lounge, a place he rarely entered. The lounge was a different world, with polished wood panels, leather chairs so soft they seemed to sigh under your weight, and a bar stocked with whiskeys he couldn't even afford to pronounce. He worked quietly, focused on the task, trying not to notice the silent figures sitting by the tall windows. Board members, investors, people so far removed from his world they might as well have been from another planet. And then, a voice. "You're Turner, right?" Jack turned, wiping his hands on his worn cloth. Standing a few feet away was Mr. Wallace himself, hands still clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. "Yes, sir," Jack said simply, his voice steady. Mr. Wallace studied him for a long moment, a silence so thick it seemed to press against Jack's chest. "You've been here a long time," Wallace said finally. 15 years, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Jack nodded. "And in all that time?" Wallace paused, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "You never once asked for more. Never once pushed your way forward." Jack thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, sir." Another long silence. Most men would have filled that space with words, apologies, promises. Jack stood there quietly, letting the silence be what it was. Mr. Wallace gave the faintest nod, then turned and walked away. That night, Jack sat in his truck for a long time before driving home. The city lights blurred in the rain. The radio buzzed low with static, and Jack wondered, for the first time in a long time, whether the path he had chosen, the quiet, thankless path, might actually be leading somewhere he never expected. But he didn't let himself believe too much. He had learned belief was fragile, and the world was hard. In the weeks that followed, Jack's work became even more challenging. He was asked to train new employees. He was sent to solve disputes between staff and tenants, issues far outside his normal duties. He was invited, quietly, without ceremony, to sit in on small meetings with building managers. No promises were made, no titles were offered, but the tests kept coming, and Jack kept answering them the only way he knew how. With steady hands, with honest words, with quiet dignity. The other staff noticed. Whispers started, jealousy from some, admiration from others. Why him? He's just the maintenance guy. Doesn't even know how to play the game. But Jack wasn't playing any game. He wasn't strategizing. He wasn't manipulating. He wasn't trying to be seen. He was just being Jack. One Friday afternoon near closing time, Mr. Wallace returned. Not in a suit this time, but in simple slacks and a navy blue sweater. He found Jack in the boiler room, elbow deep in a furnace that refused to cooperate. Wallace stood quietly in the doorway for a moment, watching the man work, sleeves rolled up, grease staining his arms. Finally, he cleared his throat. Jack looked up, wiping his hands on a rag, his face tired but calm. "Mr. Turner," Wallace said, a rare softness in his voice. "I'd like you to meet me upstairs when you're finished here." Jack blinked, then nodded. "Yes, sir." No questions, no hesitation. Just the simple acceptance of another task, whatever it might be. As Jack watched Wallace leave, a strange feeling stirred deep inside him. Not fear, not hope, something quieter, something heavier, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting to see if he would step forward into something he didn't ask for, something he wasn't sure he deserved, but something he had earned, one quiet, unnoticed day at a time. That evening, as the city outside glowed against the falling night, Jack Turner climbed the service stairs, toolbox in hand, and walked into a future that, just a few months ago, he would have never dared imagine. The next morning, Jack arrived early, just like he always did. But today, as he parked his old truck by the service entrance, something felt different. There was a weight in the air, as if the world had shifted overnight, and now it was waiting for him to take the next step. He didn't know why, but his mind kept returning to the conversation he'd had with Mr. Wallace the night before. The brief exchange, the unexpected softness in the man's voice. It was enough to make Jack wonder whether something bigger was at play. He shook the feeling off. No need to make things bigger than they were. No need to overthink. He walked into the building, past the gleaming marble floors, the pristine glass windows, and the faint smell of fresh flowers that lingered in the lobby. He didn't even glance at the reception desk. His eyes were set on the stairs that led to the maintenance area. His hands already reached for his tool belt, the familiar weight of it settling comfortably around his waist. For Jack, nothing had changed. Not yet. When Jack entered the maintenance room, the first thing he saw was Benny, one of the younger staff members, hunched over a broken air conditioning unit. Benny was always quick to complain, quick to slack off, and quick to avoid anything remotely difficult. "Hey, Jack, you're here early," Benny said, without looking up, clearly avoiding eye contact. "What's the deal with Wallace anyway? I heard he wants you upstairs today. Some kind of meeting or something?" Jack didn't reply immediately. Instead, he set down his toolbox and moved toward the unit Benny was working on. He knew Benny was just trying to be casual, trying to get some reaction out of him. But Jack didn't have the energy for small talk. Not now. "Yeah, I've got to see him after I finish here," Jack muttered, his hands working with precision as he fixed the problem Benny had started. "Don't know what it's about." Benny's eyes flickered, his curiosity piqued. "You think he's going to offer you the manager position?" Jack paused for a moment, glancing at Benny. "No," he said flatly. "I'm just doing my job." Benny snorted, clearly disappointed by Jack's lack of enthusiasm. Right. But man, you've been here forever. You've got to think you're next in line, right? I mean, no one's been doing it like you." Jack didn't respond to that. He didn't need to. The thought had crossed his mind, sure. But Jack wasn't a man who looked for what wasn't promised. Life had taught him that. He didn't chase dreams that were too far out of reach. He finished fixing the unit and stood up, wiping his hands on his rag. The conversation with Benny had left him with a strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. Was he really being watched? Was Wallace really thinking about him for something bigger? Later that morning, after finishing a few tasks around the building, Jack finally found himself standing outside the executive office, the place he'd only ever visited to pick up a broken photocopier or deliver a few maintenance reports. But today, the door was open, and Mr. Wallace was waiting for him inside. Jack hesitated for a moment before stepping in. "Come in, Turner." Wallace's voice was calm, measured, and for the first time, Jack heard something close to respect in it. "I've been waiting for you." Jack stepped forward, nodding respectfully but saying nothing. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he wasn't going to let his nervousness show. Mr. Wallace gestured for him to sit across from him at the large oak desk. The office, like the rest of the building, exuded wealth and power. But Jack had learned long ago to block out the luxuries and focus on what was real. "How's the work going?" Wallace asked, his eyes studying Jack closely. "Everything running smoothly, I trust?" "Yes, sir. Everything's fine," Jack replied, his voice steady. "Good," Wallace said, nodding slowly. "I want to discuss something with you, Turner. Something important." Jack felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his face neutral. He didn't let the anxiety creep up. Not now. "I've been watching you," Wallace continued, his voice never faltering, "for quite some time. You've been here a long time, and in all that time, you've never asked for anything. You've never pushed for more." Jack's stomach tightened, the weight of Wallace's words settling over him like a heavy blanket. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he had the distinct feeling that something was about to change. Something big. Wallace leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the desk. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "You've been running this building like it's your own. The tenants respect you, and so do the staff. I need someone with that kind of leadership. Someone who understands how things really work here." Jack felt a knot form in his throat. Leadership? He was just the maintenance guy. The one who fixed the lights, unclogged the toilets, and repaired the broken pipes. He wasn't a leader. He was a worker. "You want me to?" Take on more responsibility? Jack asked cautiously. Wallace didn't answer immediately. He just stared at Jack, his gaze cold and calculating. Yes, Wallace finally said, his voice quiet but firm. I want you to manage this building, to run things, to make sure everything works as it should, but on a bigger scale. I think you're capable of more, Turner. Jack blinked. It was all too much, too sudden. Jack stood there in silence, the weight of Wallace's words settling heavily in the room. His mind raced, but his body remained still, frozen almost. He couldn't remember ever feeling this exposed, this scrutinized. Manage the building? Jack repeated quietly, almost as if trying to make the words fit into a reality that didn't seem to belong to him. You're serious? Wallace didn't smile, didn't reassure him. The man's eyes were cold, calculating, sharp. He wasn't here to offer comfort. He was here to test Jack's reaction, to see if he was ready to take that next step. Very serious, Wallace replied, his voice steady. You've been here long enough to know how things work. The tenants trust you, the staff respects you. You're the only one who could take this place to the next level. Jack shook his head slowly, still processing. This wasn't the life he had built. He was the behind-the-scenes guy, the one who fixed the things that broke, cleaned up the messes that no one else wanted to handle. He wasn't meant to be in charge. He wasn't meant to step into the spotlight. I don't know, Jack said, his voice hesitant. I've been here for years. I've never... Exactly, Wallace cut him off, leaning forward slightly. You've never asked for more. You've always kept your head down and done the work. And that's what makes you the perfect candidate for this job. Jack's stomach twisted. He didn't want to be perfect for this job. He wanted to fix pipes. He wanted to take care of the things no one else noticed. The weight of Wallace's gaze was unwavering. It was a challenge, a test. Let me think about it, Jack said, finally breaking the silence. I'll need some time to... No time, Wallace interrupted, his voice sharper this time. I need an answer now. This is a crucial decision. The building's future depends on it. Jack blinked, his heart pounding. No time. No time to think. No time to adjust. Just a decision. Now, for the next few hours, Jack couldn't concentrate on his work. He moved through the building mechanically, going through the motions like a man on autopilot. His hands fixed broken doors. His eyes replaced light bulbs, but his mind was far away. How did this happen? What does Wallace really want from me? Am I even capable of this? The self-doubt crept in slowly, at first like a whisper, then growing louder with every passing minute. The weight of responsibility felt unbearable. If he said yes, what would it mean? Would he still be the same man? Would his life change forever? Would he even like who he would become? Jack stopped in front of the elevator shaft, staring at the long steel doors. His fingers brushed the cool metal. A few months ago, he never would have imagined being in this position. But now, the decision had been made for him. He was back in his truck by mid-afternoon. But the drive home felt different today. It wasn't just the usual quiet ride back to his small house in the suburbs. No, today his mind was racing. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his thoughts swirling, crashing into each other like waves. He had barely spoken to Laura when he arrived. She was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, but he couldn't focus on her. The weight of the decision was still too heavy. "Jack," she said softly, noticing his distracted gaze as he sat down at the table. Is everything okay? Yeah, I'm fine, Jack muttered, though he didn't feel fine. His chest was tight, his heart unsure, just tired. Laura didn't press. She knew Jack. She knew when something was off, but she respected his silence, for now. Later that evening, as Jack lay in bed, his mind refused to settle. His thoughts turned back to the conversation he'd had with Wallace. It was too sudden, too much. But maybe, just maybe, it was a chance to prove something, not to anyone else, but to himself. Jack had always been a man of simple needs, a steady job, a family he could support. But now there was a new reality on the horizon, a reality he wasn't sure he was ready for. He couldn't sleep, not that night, not with the question lingering over him like a unspoken promise. Should I take the job? The next morning, Jack didn't go straight to the maintenance room. Instead, he found himself outside the building, standing in the shadow of the grand entrance, looking up at the towering glass structure. What if I say no? What if he stayed where he was, doing the same job, living the same quiet life he had always known? The thought of staying where he was felt safe. But there was something else there too. Something that nagged at him. Something that told him he couldn't stay the same. Not anymore. He had a decision to make. Jack entered the building, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Today, he would either accept or walk away. He knew what he needed to do. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the title. It was about proving to himself that he was more than just the man behind the scenes. He walked past the elevator and headed straight for the executive offices. He knocked once before entering. Mr. Wallace was already sitting behind his desk, waiting. This time, there was no pretense, no game, no facade. Jack didn't hesitate. He walked in, standing tall, and with a quiet but steady voice, he said the words he never thought he'd say. I'll take the job. The first few days after Jack's decision felt like a blur. He was no longer just the maintenance man, no longer the quiet, unnoticed worker who fixed the leaky pipes and unclogged the drains. Now, he was something else, something bigger, something more visible. The morning after he accepted the job, Wallace had already scheduled a meeting with the board. Jack was introduced to the staff as the new building manager, a position that came with a sharp increase in responsibility and expectations, a title he had never imagined for himself. At first, the staff didn't know what to make of him. There were whispers in the halls, glances exchanged behind his back. Some seemed happy for him, others, not so much. How long do you think he'll last? One of the senior technicians muttered to another as Jack passed by, clipboard in hand. I give it 6 months before he cracks under the pressure, the other replied, voice low. Jack heard the words, but he didn't react. He couldn't afford to. The truth was, the weight of the position was starting to settle in. It wasn't just about fixing things anymore. Now, it was about managing people, personalities, egos, moods. It was about making decisions that would affect everyone who worked in the building. It was about keeping the tenants satisfied, the investors pleased, and most of all, keeping Wallace happy. Jack had never been good at dealing with people. He wasn't a smooth talker. He didn't know how to smile and make others feel at ease. He was a man of action, not words. But now he had to be both. The first major test came when the HVAC system malfunctioned during a heat wave. The building was sweltering, the air thick with humidity. Tenants were furious. Complaints flooded the office. Jack was forced to deal with it. He called in the specialists, worked through the night with his team to repair the system, but there was no simple fix. The system was outdated, and the damage was extensive. The tenants wanted answers. The investors demanded solutions. Jack stood in the lobby late one evening, looking at the lobby's glass walls, staring out at the city skyline that seemed so distant, so untouchable from where he stood. The weight of it all crushed in on him. He wasn't just a man doing repairs anymore. He was responsible for the lives of everyone in the building. The pressure was suffocating. "Mr. Turner?" A voice cut through his thoughts. He turned to find a familiar face, Lisa, one of the tenants he'd always spoken with casually. She had a folder in her hand, her face set in a serious expression. Jack had always liked Lisa. She was straightforward, no nonsense. "Lisa," Jack greeted her, straightening up. "Is everything okay?" She nodded, but her expression didn't soften. "I just wanted to speak with you about the HVAC situation. People are getting desperate, Jack. The heat is unbearable and the air's been down for days. I'm not the only one who's worried." Jack's mind raced, trying to come up with a solution. Something to ease the pressure, but all he could do was nod slowly. "I'm doing everything I can, Lisa. We're working on it. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I understand how hard this is for everyone." Her eyes softened for a moment, and she put a hand on his arm, a rare gesture of kindness. "We know you're trying, Jack, but you need to tell us when it's going to be fixed. People are losing their patience. You have to make them believe that you're in control of this." The weight of her words hit Jack hard. The first real test of his new role had come, and it was clear. He wasn't just fighting the malfunctioning air conditioning system. He was fighting perception. He was fighting doubt. The following days blurred into a haze of phone calls, emergency repairs, and strained meetings with the board. The pressure only intensified. He hadn't been prepared for how isolated he would feel. Before, he was just the maintenance guy. People didn't expect much from him beyond fixing things. But now, he was expected to lead, and no one knew if he could. There were moments, small and fleeting, when Jack would look out the window of his office, staring at the city below. He thought about what he had left behind, the work he knew, the quiet life. The first morning after the HVAC situation was resolved, Jack found himself standing in front of a crowd of tenants who had gathered for a meeting. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted something from him. He stood behind the podium, the light from the projector casting long shadows across his face. "I know the heat was unbearable," Jack began, his voice rough at first, but it steadied as he continued. "I understand your frustration, and I promise you we fixed the problem. But I need your trust. I need you to know that I'm here to make sure this building runs smoothly. From now on, I'm not just here to fix things. I'm here to make sure they don't break in the first place." His words seemed to reach them. Slowly, they calmed down. The anger in their eyes softened just a little. As Jack walked back to his office that afternoon, he realized something had shifted. He wasn't just fixing things anymore. He wasn't just behind the scenes. For better or worse, he was now in the spotlight. And that meant he had to do more than solve problems. He had to show them all, show himself, that he was capable of leading them. The days leading up to the board meeting felt like an endless string of challenges for Jack. He was barely sleeping, barely eating, and when he did, it was just enough to keep him going. His mind was constantly on the move, always thinking about what needed to be fixed, what couldn't be ignored. And yet, despite his best efforts, there were always new problems, new crises. One morning, just as Jack was about to leave for work, his phone rang. It was Wallace's assistant, a voice he had come to recognize as a harbinger of stress. "Mr. Turner, I need to inform you that there's been a major issue with the building's budget. We've just learned that there's a shortfall that needs to be addressed immediately. The investors are meeting this afternoon. I need you there." Jack's stomach dropped. A shortfall. He hadn't seen this coming. The building's budget was already tight. There was no room for error. He could already feel the weight of the coming storm. As he walked into the meeting later that afternoon, the tension in the room was palpable. The board members sat around a long, polished table, their eyes narrowing as Jack took his seat at the head of the table. Wallace stood at the far end, arms crossed, waiting for Jack to take charge. Jack swallowed, steeling himself. He had come a long way from the man who had first walked into this office, unsure and unsure of his worth. Today, there could be no hesitation. There could be no doubt. "I've reviewed the figures," Jack began, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "The shortfall is real, but I believe we can resolve this by adjusting the building's operating expenses and cutting unnecessary costs. We can also look into increasing rent for the luxury tenants, but we need to proceed cautiously." A murmur ran through the room, and Jack's palms were slick with sweat. The investors were not the forgiving type. They wanted results, not excuses. But Jack held his ground. He continued outlining his plan. Adjustments to maintenance contracts, cutting back on unnecessary services, negotiating better deals with suppliers. Every word he spoke felt like an attempt to convince not just the investors, but also himself. As the meeting went on, Jack could feel the weight of each decision bearing down on him. He wasn't just making choices for the building anymore. He was making choices that affected the livelihoods of the people who work there, the janitors, the maintenance crew, the office staff. If the board didn't approve of his plan, people could lose their jobs. Their lives could be turned upside down. He glanced around the room. Wallace was watching him closely, his expression unreadable. Jack's voice wavered for a split second. "This isn't just about numbers," he said. "It's about the people who live and work here. We can't forget that." The room was silent for a moment. Wallace's eyes flickered with something Jack couldn't quite place. But then, slowly, the board members began to nod. One by one, they gave their approval. The pressure wasn't gone, not by a long shot. But for the first time, Jack could feel the weight shifting, like he was starting to win them over. After the meeting, Jack stepped out into the hallway, his heart still racing. He hadn't been sure he could pull it off. He wasn't a numbers guy. He didn't know all the ins and outs of the financial world. But he had done it. He had kept his cool, made his case, and proved that he could handle the responsibility. That evening, as he sat in his office, staring at the skyline once again, Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe. The shortfall had been addressed. The investors were satisfied. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack felt like he had truly earned his place. It wasn't just about the building anymore. It wasn't about the air conditioning problems or the budgets. It was about him. Jack Turner had come a long way from the man who had stood outside the building unsure of his worth. Now, he knew, he had proven it to himself. He had earned his spot in that office, at that table, standing beside people who once seemed so far removed from his reality. But more than that, he had learned something valuable. He had learned that being in charge wasn't about having all the answers. It was about making the tough calls, even when you didn't have all the information. It was about standing tall in the face of doubt. It was about proving not just to others, but to yourself that you were capable. As Jack walked home that evening, the weight he had been carrying for so long felt just a little bit lighter. He wasn't done yet. He still had more work to do, more challenges to face. But for the first time, Jack felt ready to face whatever came next, because now he knew that he could. And as the night fell over the city, Jack stood outside his house, looking up at the stars. He had done it. He had turned his life around, one decision at a time. And now he was ready to face the future, whatever it might hold. Jack sat alone in his office, the last traces of daylight fading from the large windows that framed his view of the city. The building, once just a place he worked in, had become a symbol of his journey. His rise from a quiet, unnoticed maintenance worker to the leader of the very establishment he had once quietly serviced. The weight of the office chair beneath him seemed to mirror the weight of the transformation he had undergone. It had been a long, grueling journey, a series of decisions that had, at the time, seemed like impossible choices. He had never imagined himself in this position, never believed that one day he would be standing in front of the board, negotiating budgets, managing crises, and leading a team. The path had been unclear at first, shrouded in self-doubt and fear of failure. But now, sitting there in the silence of his office, Jack realized how far he had come. The building was quieter now. The hum of the HVAC system that had once broken down during the summer heat was now running smoothly. The tenants had stopped complaining, the board was satisfied, and the employees respected him. But more than all of that, Jack had finally earned something that had always eluded him: peace. He thought back to the first day he had accepted Wallace's challenge. At the time, he had been driven more by fear of missing out on an opportunity than by confidence in his own ability. He remembered how out of place he had felt during the early meetings, how he had second-guessed every decision he made, how the weight of the expectations from everyone around him had seemed like too much to bear. But now, sitting in that same office, the room that had once felt foreign, Jack felt at home. The truth was, the journey had been far from smooth. There had been moments when Jack had doubted his ability to lead. The pressure, the stress, the relentless pace of decisions that needed to be made, it had all taken its toll. There were nights when he lay awake, wondering if he had made the right choice, wondering if he was truly worthy of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. But then, there had been moments of clarity, moments when the weight of the responsibility began to feel lighter, when he saw the tenants thank him for solving a problem, when a team member came to him with a suggestion rather than a complaint, when the investors looked to him not with skepticism, but with trust. Those moments had been small, But they had been the ones that slowly shifted Jack's view of himself. And with each success, however small, his confidence had grown. What Jack hadn't anticipated, though, was how much of the struggle had been internal. It wasn't just about proving to others that he was capable. It was about proving to himself that he had the strength to handle it all. He had come to realize that his own doubts, his own insecurities, had been the biggest obstacles in his path. Not the building's problems, not the tenants' complaints, not the investors' demands. It had all come down to how he saw himself. For the first time, Jack understood what true leadership meant. It wasn't about knowing everything or being perfect. It wasn't about always having the right answers. It was about making decisions, sometimes difficult decisions, with confidence, even when the outcome wasn't guaranteed. It was about taking responsibility, not just for the successes, but for the failures too. It was about growing, about facing fear and doubt head on, and coming out the other side stronger. Jack stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the skyline. The lights from the buildings below flickered, and he found himself thinking about all the people who had crossed his path in this journey, the ones who had doubted him, the ones who had supported him, the ones who had been with him from the very beginning. They had all played a part in his growth. There were still challenges ahead, Jack knew that. This position, this new role he had taken on, wasn't a finish line. It was the beginning of something more. The building would continue to have issues. The demands would never cease, and he would continue to be tested. But now, Jack felt ready for it. He had proven to himself that he could rise to the occasion. He had earned the respect of those around him, and perhaps, most importantly, he had earned his own respect. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Wallace, no doubt, with another update, another challenge. Jack glanced at it but didn't immediately pick it up. Instead, he took a deep breath and smiled. He had done it. He had faced the test, and he had come through it. For the first time, he felt the weight of the past few months lifting, just enough for him to breathe, to reflect. The journey wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But as Jack sat back down at his desk, he knew something that he hadn't known before. He was ready. The following morning, Jack stood in front of his office window once again. The sun had just risen, casting a warm glow across the city. The view, though familiar, felt different now. His perspective had shifted. He wasn't just looking out at the world anymore. He was a part of it, a leader among the many who walk these streets, each of them fighting their own battles, working toward their own victories. Jack had come to understand that success was not measured by one grand moment or a single achievement. It was measured in how you rose after every fall, how you faced adversity without backing down, how you proved to yourself that you could withstand the pressure, the doubt, the fear. It was in the daily grind, the constant fight to move forward no matter what. His phone buzzed again, and this time Jack answered. It was Wallace, of course, calling with more business to discuss, as always. Jack, the investors are impressed with your handling of the budget crisis. They're ready to move forward with your proposed changes. They're even discussing an expansion plan, Wallace said, his voice carrying a hint of approval Jack had never heard before. You've done well. Keep it up. A part of Jack felt proud, of course. But there was another part of him that had come to appreciate something far more valuable than approval. It was the realization that he no longer needed to seek anyone's validation. The journey he had taken was his own, and it had shaped him into someone he could be proud of, regardless of what others thought. "Thank you, Wallace," Jack replied, his voice steady but with a warmth that he hadn't felt before. "I'll make sure we stay on track. But I think we both know that this success is about more than just numbers. It's about the people who depend on us." After the call ended, Jack sat back in his chair, looking out the window one last time. He had always dreamed of something more. A life where he wasn't just a cog in a machine, where his efforts mattered, where he could make a real difference. And now he had it. But what mattered more than the title, more than the praise, was how he had grown. For so long he had doubted himself. He had questioned his worth, his ability, and whether he was truly cut out for the role he had been thrust into. But in the quiet moments, the moments where he reflected on the challenges he had faced, the obstacles he had overcome, Jack realized something profound. He had always been capable. He had always had what it took. He just needed to believe it. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts, and Jack turned to see Lisa standing in the doorway. She had become one of his most trusted allies in the building, someone who had always been honest with him, even when it wasn't easy. "Hey, Jack," Lisa said with a small smile. "I just wanted to check in. We've all noticed the difference. You've really turned things around here. I think I can speak for the tenants when I say we're all grateful for everything you've done." Jack stood up, feeling a warmth in his chest. Her words, simple but genuine, were more valuable than any approval he could get from the board. This was real. This was what it meant to lead, to make a tangible difference in the lives of the people around you. "Thank you, Lisa," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "But none of this would have been possible without the support of people like you. It's all of us working together." As Lisa left, Jack sat back down at his desk, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything he had accomplished. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the fears, the doubts, the moments when he wasn't sure he could keep going. But now, as he reflected on how far he had come, Jack understood that every struggle had been worth it. Every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty had led him to this point. There was still work to be done. There were still challenges ahead, and the future was far from certain. But Jack knew that he was no longer the man who had walked into this building unsure of his place. He was no longer the maintenance worker who had feared stepping into the spotlight. He was Jack Turner, the leader of this building. Jack stood up one last time, walking to the window and looking out over the city. The sun had fully risen now, casting everything in a golden light. It felt symbolic somehow, like the dawn of a new chapter in his life, a chapter where he would continue to grow, continue to lead, and continue to prove to himself that he was worthy of the role he had claimed for himself. As the morning light bathed the office in warmth, Jack took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he was no longer running from something. He was moving towards something. His journey was just beginning, and no matter what came next, Jack was ready. Every story leaves a mark, big or small. If this one meant something to you, take a second to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. More stories are waiting for you. See you soon.